When a species gets down to one last individual, this is known as the endling. It stands as the final member of a species' lineage, a lineage that stretches back over millions of years. Their stories are tragic, but serve as a reminder of the important role that humans play in both destroying and protecting biodiversity. This is part 3 of my series on endlings. In this video, we're going to look at 5 species and subspecies of animal, and we'll hear the stories of their final survivors. Welcome back to All About Nature. On my channel, I try to bring nature-related content that's both educational and entertaining. If you like this kind of content, then please consider liking the video, leaving a comment, or even subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate your support. In the middle of the ocean, halfway between New Zealand and New Caledonia, are 3 small islands known as Norfolk, Phillip, and Nepean Island. On October 10, 1774, James Cook came across them and put them on the map. While some recent evidence suggests that Polynesians had some small settlements there in the past, when Cook and his crew arrived, the islands had no human population, instead abounding with unique flora and fauna. German naturalist Johann Reinhold Forster and his son George were accompanying Cook on this voyage. They were the first to describe a new species of parrot that was found on both Norfolk and Phillip Island. The Norfolk Island Kākā was a large parrot that was said to live both on the ground and on the trees. It had an olive green back and orange, red, and yellow cheeks and underparts. It had a long curved bill and large feet and legs. 16 years after it was discovered, in 1780, a sailor named John Hunter was shipwrecked on Norfolk Island, and while he was there, he took to drawing the local wildlife. One of the images he produced was this bird, an orange and green parrot depicted on a kangaroo apple. It is the only image that has ever been produced of the species based off of a specimen in the wild. A new penal colony on Norfolk Island had been established in 1788, and this small colony of prisoners was going to put an end to the bird. To support the penal colony, large parts of the island were cleared for agriculture. When the prisoners wanted meat, they often took to hunting the local wildlife, and the Kākā was a prime target. While we know very little about their biology, the parrots were similar to their New Zealand cousins. They were clumsy flyers and spent most of their time on the ground. They were also naturally inquisitive and approached people without fear. By the 1830s, the Kākās had been eradicated from Norfolk Island. It was around this time that the drawing made by Hunter was noticed by the famous English ornithologist John Gould. Gould didn't recognize the orange and green parrot in the drawing. He described it as Nestor productus and set out to learn more about the species, but he had no idea that the parrots were already gone from Norfolk Island. Over the next few years, it was realized that the species also lived on the nearby Phillip Island, and a few birds were collected and placed in zoos and private collections. At least one of the birds was being kept in the Sydney Zoo. Gould managed to study it, producing drawings that were much truer to life than the one produced by Hunter. He also tried to surmise as much as he could about the bird's biology, based on its behavior in captivity. The specimen at the Sydney Zoo had been collected by Major Anderson. Anderson said that the birds fed on nectar, walked on the ground, and only flew up into the canopies to eat or to nest. Their nests, according to Anderson, were made in tree hollows and contained clutches of 4 eggs. Most of the information provided by Major Anderson cannot be confirmed, but Gould noted that the size and shape of the Norfolk Island Kākā's beak likely meant that the species also fed on seeds and grubs found in rotting wood. Another specimen being kept in the London Zoo was also observed by Gould. By 1850, it was the last surviving member of the species known in the entire world. The endling was being fed vegetables, fruit juices, and dairy products like cheese. Gould observed that the bird made a strange call, which he described as being similar to the bark of a dog. When the specimen at the London Zoo died in 1851, the species was more than likely extinct. It's possible that a tiny population remained on Phillip Island for a while longer, but introduced pigs, goats, rabbits, and cats would have put an end to the remaining parrots in a short period of time. Today, only 16 skins of the Norfolk Island Kākā are known to exist in museums, and all of them were collected from Phillip Island in the early 1800s. Between 15 and 20 million years ago, on another set of islands in the Pacific, a family of birds emerged. This family, the Mohoidae, became known as the Hawaiian honeyeaters, and at least 7 species developed. They were spread out across the islands, where they fed primarily on the nectar of flowers. Early Polynesian settlers of Hawaii regularly hunted birds for meat, and at least one of the species of honeyeater is known to have been hunted to extinction before European contact. But in 1778, the first Europeans arrived in Hawaii, and the introduction of species that would ensue would cause major changes to the ecology of the island chain. Cats, rats, mongooses, and most devastatingly for the birds, mosquitoes, were all introduced. Mosquitoes carried with them diseases that the birds of Hawaii had never encountered before, and their populations were quickly decimated. The huge influx of new settlers also meant that large portions of the forest were cleared. Of the 6 species of honeyeater that still survived on the islands, 4 were extinct by the 20th century. In 1934, the last Hawaii ʻōʻō died, leaving only one living species in the entire family, the Kauaʻi ʻōʻō. The Kauaʻi ʻōʻō lived only on the island of Kauaʻi, and it made its nests in the hollows of large trees. As the mosquitoes took over lowland forests, the birds were pushed higher up the mountains. Unfortunately, the trees at higher altitudes lacked sufficient cavities for nesting. Few, if any, of the birds were able to produce young, and by the 1960s, less than 40 remained. In the 1970s, John L. Sincock captured this video. It's the only known footage of the Kauaʻi ʻōʻō. He also made recordings of the species' call. By 1981, only one pair of the birds survived on the island. In 1982, Hurricane Iwa came through, and the last female Kauaʻi ʻōʻō died. The endling of the species was a male, and he survived alone on the mountain forests of Kauaʻi for 5 years. He was occasionally observed feeding on nectar or hopping through the canopy. At times he wasn't seen at all, just heard singing. His call echoed out into a forest that held no more of his kind. He was recorded for the last time in 1987. In the year 2000, the IUCN declared the species extinct, bringing the last of the 7 species in this ancient family of birds to an end. This is the first entire family of bird species to go extinct in modern times. Hawaii has some of the highest rates of extinction today. Of the 142 endemic Hawaiian bird species, 95 are already gone. While not yet classified as extinct, the Baiji is assumed to be gone. This river dolphin was native to the Yangtze River in China. In Chinese folklore, the Baiji was the reincarnation of a beautiful young girl who died as she escaped from her stepfather. The species was nicknamed the Goddess of the Yangtze and was considered to be the protector of fishermen. But beginning in the 1950s, China began its great leap forward. This was an economic and social campaign led by the Chinese Communist Party. While the country saw major economic growth, it also began to secularize under government pressure, and people stopped venerating the Baiji as a goddess. The population of China also exploded, and the Yangtze River began to be used more and more for fishing and for transportation. The Baiji was regularly struck by ships and killed for meat and leather. The water became polluted, and the Baiji population shrank extremely quickly. By the 1880s, they were practically gone from the river system, and scientists knew that the species was on the brink of extinction. In 1994, the Chinese government delivered another blow to the species when they began construction on the Three Gorges Dam. The massive project cut straight through the Yangtze River and was later determined to have played a direct role in the disappearance of the Baiji. Back in 1980, a 2-year-old Baiji was accidentally caught in a fishing net. He was taken to the Institute of Hydrobiology at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, where he was raised and studied for 23 years. He was named Kiki. A survey for the Baiji in 1997 found only 13 dolphins remaining in the wild, and Kiki was the only captive specimen that remained. As the wild population continued to decline, it was clear that even if protective measures were put in place, the small size of the remaining population meant that the species was doomed. On the 22nd of May 2002, 2 photographs were taken of a dolphin swimming in the Yangtze. After analysis was complete, experts agreed that this was certainly a Baiji. Sadly, these photographs are the last confirmed evidence of the species existing in the wild. While sightings have persisted, none have been confirmed. The problem is that the Yangtze River is also home to the endangered Yangtze finless porpoise, so most reported sightings of Baiji are actually just cases of mistaken identity. On July 14, 2002, only 2 months after the last confirmed wild sighting of a Baiji, Kiki died, and with his death, the Baiji is assumed to have gone extinct. While it is possible that the species is still holding on undetected in the wild, it's incredibly unlikely. The Baiji is currently assessed as critically endangered by the IUCN, though it is presumed extinct. One of the most recognizable African animals is the zebra. Composed of 3 species, zebras are known for their bold black and white stripes. The most abundant species by far is the plain zebra, which has 5 or 6 recognized living subspecies. But in the not-so-distant past, there was a subspecies of plain zebra that didn't fit the mold. The quagga only lived in the southernmost parts of Africa, and were easily distinguished from other subspecies. While they did have the characteristic stripes, these were brown and white, and were limited to the head, neck, and shoulders. The rest of the body was a tan-brown color, and they had white on their bellies and legs. They could be found in large numbers in the Karoo of South Africa, probably living in herds of up to 50 animals. But as the Dutch began to settle in the region in the 17th century, the story of the end of the quagga began. The quagga were easily hunted, and as a result, large numbers were killed for their meat. On top of this, their skins became desirable for trading. European settlers brought with them guns, and local people too began to hunt the quagga with firearms in order to trade their skins. Quagga were also occasionally used on farms to help keep livestock safe from predators. The quaggas were seen as high-strung and lively, being unafraid of attacking intruders. They began to be sent to zoos around the world. Contrary to the reputation for being lively in Africa, in zoos they were viewed as being considerably tamer than Burchell's zebra, another subspecies of plain zebra. Because zoos preferred them, the London Zoo attempted to establish a quagga breeding program, but it proved too difficult and was eventually abandoned. Zoos continued to send to South Africa for new wild quaggas to be sent any time that their captive animals died. The only pictures that exist of living quagga were taken in the 1860s at the London Zoo. 5 pictures exist, all of the same mare in an enclosure with metal bars and a brick floor. In 1872, the quagga at the London Zoo died, leaving only 2 captive specimens, one in Berlin and one in Amsterdam. The London Zoo sent for another quagga, but for some reason none were being sent. In 1875, the Berlin quagga died, leaving the one at the Amsterdam Zoo as the last one in Europe. Almost nothing is known about her, as her existence was not considered remarkable. No one in Europe understood the state of the quagga in the wild. On August 12, 1883, she died. And now, several zoos in Europe were waiting for news from South Africa regarding their replacements. As it turns out, none would ever come. By the 1850s, the quagga were gone from the Karoo. One small population remained to the northeast, on the other side of the Orange River, but they too were hunted to extinction in the 1870s. Some assumed that the animals would be found north of the Vaal River, but it turns out that with the decimation of the last population in the 1870s, the quagga had gone extinct in the wild. The mare at the Amsterdam Zoo was actually the Endling. Countless people who strolled past her enclosure had no idea that she was, at the time, among the rarest animals on Earth. Naturalist Henry Bryden would later write that an animal so beautiful, so capable of domestication and use, and to be found not long since in so great abundance, should have been allowed to be swept from the face of the earth, is surely a disgrace to our latter-day civilization. Interestingly, the gene for quagga coloration persists in the surviving plain zebra population. As a result, a project to breed zebras so that they look as much as possible like the quagga was begun in 1987. Wild zebras with reduced striping on the hind part of their bodies were chosen and carefully bred in favor of quagga characteristics. Today, the program has produced a significant number of zebras with quagga coloration, and the hope is that the animals could be restored to the Karoo alongside wildebeest and ostriches in an effort to restore the environment to what it once was. The Galapagos giant tortoise is one of the largest tortoises in the world, reaching weights of as much as 417 kilograms or 919 pounds. The species is spread across the 18 major islands of the Galapagos. Due to the prolonged separation on the different islands, as many as 15 subspecies have developed, the majority of which are named after the island in which they're found. One such subspecies was the Pinta Island Tortoise. In 1535, Tomás de Berlanga set sail from Panama for Peru, but a storm pushed his ship out to sea. He and his crew were likely the first people to ever set foot on the Galapagos Islands. What they found was an abundance of unique wildlife that was totally unafraid of people. There were large colonies of nesting seabirds, aquatic iguanas, penguins, and of course, giant tortoises. Long ocean journeys were dangerous and often led to the deaths of many sailors. Food was a constant concern. Whenever an island with abundant wildlife was found, it was noted for future sailors. Throughout the ensuing centuries, countless ships stopped by the islands in order for their crews to eat some fresh protein. The tortoises were particularly popular because they could be kept alive on the ships for long periods of time and eaten at a later date. They were hunted non-stop, with an estimated 200,000 taken from the Galapagos over the centuries. In the 1800s, the tortoises began to be transported to zoos around the world to be put on display, and by the end of the century, the Pinta Island tortoises were almost gone. With so few animals spread out across the island, their numbers continued to fall, and in the 1950s, the final blow was delivered. Goats were released on the island and began to breed prolifically. They ate through all of the island's vegetation, and it was believed that the Pinta Island tortoise had gone extinct. That is until 20 years later, in 1971, when a single Pinta Island tortoise was discovered still surviving on the island. He was moved to the Charles Darwin Research Station on Santa Cruz Island and placed under the care of Fausto Llerena. researchers continue to look for any other surviving members of the subspecies, including in zoos around the world, but none was ever found. This single male was the last of his kind. He was given the name Lonesome George. While we aren't certain why George was selected, it's believed that he was named after the American comedic actor George Gobel. Throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, George remained on Santa Cruz Island waiting for another of his kind to be found. It was decided that in the meantime, attempts should be made to try to at least get him to mate with females of a similar subspecies, so that some hybrid offspring could be produced. In the early 2000s, 2 female wolf volcano giant tortoises were placed in his enclosure. In 2008, he mated with one of them, and she produced 13 eggs. But within a few months, it was clear that all of the eggs were not viable. In 2009, he mated again, this time producing 5 eggs, but once again, none of them were viable. It was determined that the wolf volcano giant tortoises were not the most closely related subspecies. So in 2011, the females were switched with Espanola Island giant tortoises. But George would never mate again. On June 24, 2012, Fausto Llerena, who had been caring for Lonesome George for 42 years, found him dead in his enclosure. He had died of natural causes, and was estimated to have been over 100 years old. His remains were taxidermied and put on display in the Ecuadorian capital, Quito, before eventually being flown back to the Galapagos, where they are currently housed at the Fausto Llerena Breeding Center, named after the man who dedicated his life to caring for the Pinta Island Tortoise's endling. But the story has one final twist. As it turns out, Isabella Island, the largest island in the chain, had been a dumping ground for tortoises collected by sailors from all of the other islands. A genetic survey of 1,600 tortoises in 2011 and 2012 showed an interesting result. 17 tortoises from around Wolf Volcano were shown to be 50% Pinta Island tortoise. Most interestingly, 5 of them were juvenile, which meant that it was likely that at least one pure Pinta Island tortoise remained alive on Wolf Volcano. While that pure tortoise hasn't been found, there are hopes that the 17 hybrids can be used to breed the Pinta Island tortoise back and return the subspecies to Pinta Island. The island was declared goat-free in 2003, and the vegetation has made a comeback. All that's missing now is the giant tortoise that once called the island home. And that's it for today's video. Let me know of any other endlings you've heard of in the comments below. Later this week, I'll be releasing a compilation video of all of the endlings I covered in this series. I need to say a special thanks to my patrons. Without their ongoing support, I wouldn't be able to produce a video like this every week. If you want to support the channel, consider joining us on Patreon. The link is in the video description below. If you want to check out the other videos in this series, click on the playlist on the screen now. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.